It's a pleasure to be here, and I know that I stand between you and the cocktail hour, so I will not go on too long. But as was just suggested, we've done a lot of interesting and I think important things within the last year, and so I want to share some of those with you. It's great to be here with you today, and I want to start by thanking the conference organizers for putting together such an impressive event and for inviting me to speak about the future of offshore oil and gas regulation in the United States. It was exactly a year ago yesterday that I became director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Regulation, and Enforcement, which is the agency responsible for regulating offshore drilling and production in the U.S. We renamed the agency to better reflect its mission, but we had a massive task ahead of us at that time. And that was undertaking a top-to-bottom reorganization of the agency and implementing major regulatory reforms, while at the same time responding to the worst offshore oil spill in the history of the United States. The tragic loss of life and the enormous immediate and visible damage to the environment from the Deepwater Horizon tragedy were a wake-up call for industry and government alike, sending a clear message that we had to take a good, hard, sustained look at existing safety technologies, practices, and regulations, and that we needed to make immediate and lasting improvements. Over the past year, my staff and I have been working extremely hard to do just that. And today I will share with you the enormous changes that we're implementing. I will also describe some of the important recent international developments that underscore the value and importance of international cooperation and collaboration in the realm of offshore drilling. And finally, I want to outline a comprehensive set of guiding principles for the regulation of offshore drilling and development. But let me begin by talking about the structural reforms we are putting in place in the U.S. We're in the final stages of a comprehensive reorganization of the former Minerals Management Service. That agency had three important but conflicting missions: promoting resource development, enforcing safety regulations, and maximizing revenue from offshore operations. Starting on October 1 of this year, these functions will be carried out by three strong, separate agencies, all within the U.S. Department of the Interior. The first is the Office of Natural Resources Revenue, which is responsible solely for collecting revenues from offshore leases, and it's been operating separately from the rest of the agency since last October. Second, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which will be responsible for managing development of the nation's offshore resources in an environmentally and economically responsible way. And third, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, which will enforce safety and environmental regulations offshore. Now, in making the important structural and design decisions that are shaping these last two new agencies, we've relied on several guiding principles that I want to share with you. First, separating resource management from safety oversight to allow our permitting engineers and inspectors greater independence, more budgetary autonomy, and clearer senior leadership focus. For BSEE, which is the nickname for that agency, the goal is to create an aggressive, tough-minded, but fair regulator that can effectively evaluate the risks of offshore drilling, promote the development of safety cultures in offshore operators, and keep pace with technological advances. Second, ensuring that we create a strong and effective BSEE so that it can properly carry out the critical safety and environmental protection functions that are central to its mission and that were, frankly, underfunded and under-resourced within MMS. Third, providing an organizational structure that ensures that thorough environmental analyses are conducted and that the potential environmental effects of proposed operations are given appropriate weight during decision-making related to resource management. We are placing our environmental science and environmental analysis resources in the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, to ensure that leasing and plan approval activities are properly balanced and that environmental considerations are fully taken into account at early stages of the process, not after important resource decisions have already been made. But these organizational changes alone, significant though they are not enough to address the significant institutional weaknesses of the past. That is why we are taking concrete actions over and above the reorganization to strengthen certain key functions. This includes our environmental enforcement function, our inspections program, the way we review and approve applications for permits to drill, and the way the agency deals with conflicts of interest. I want to share with you some of the key improvements we are making in each of the areas that I just mentioned. First, we've taken a number of steps to strengthen the role of environmental analysis and enforcement in the new regulatory framework. We have created the brand new position of Chief Environmental Officer in BOEM to provide institutional assurance that environmental considerations will be given adequate weight in resource development decisions. This includes many things, including the development of 5-year plans, leasing decisions, exploration and development plan reviews, and other decisions that bear on resource management. We're also creating in BSEE a new dedicated environmental enforcement and compliance program. Historically, our overworked personnel have tried from time to time to determine whether operators have fulfilled their environmental commitments in the form of stipulations and mitigations to minimize the adverse impact of operations on the environment. But the agency had never had personnel specifically dedicated to that task, and now we will. In addition to strengthening the role of environmental analysis and enforcement, we have also taken a number of steps to improve our inspections program. Earlier this month, we announced that we would begin to use multi-person, multidisciplinary inspections teams for offshore oil and gas inspections. The new process will allow teams to inspect multiple operations simultaneously and thoroughly, and will enhance the quality of inspections on larger facilities. In addition, we are creating for the first time a national offshore training center, led by a training director whom we are also currently seeking through a broad nationwide search. The director of the National Offshore Training Center will develop national training strategies, curricula, and programs to maintain and improve the technical capabilities of offshore inspections and compliance personnel throughout the Bureau. This will be a huge improvement on what existed previously. In the past, our inspectors have learned how to do their jobs through a combination of on-the-job training and industry-sponsored courses aimed at teaching primarily at how certain types of equipment function. The agency has never before had a training center dedicated to training inspectors on how to do their jobs, and now we will. We also recently announced improvements to the permit application and review process, which is obviously of great interest to operators. First, we published a permit application checklist to assist offshore operators in submitting complete applications to drill. We also implemented a requirement that the agency conduct completeness checks before beginning an in-depth substantive review of the application. This will allow our staff to identify the major gaps in the submission early in the review process. In addition, we developed clear permit review priorities that we believe will expedite our review. And finally, in the coming weeks, we will launch an online tracking system which will allow operators to track the status of their applications. We're also taking steps to address conflicts of interest within the agency. We've issued a tough new recusal policy that will reduce the potential for real or perceived conflicts of interest in our enforcement programs. Under the policy, employees in our district offices, including our permitting engineers and inspectors, must notify their supervisors about any potential conflict of interest and request to be recused from performing any official duty where such a conflict exists or may exist. As a result, our inspectors are required to recuse themselves from performing inspections of the facilities of former employers. Also, our inspectors must report any attempt by industry or by other agency personnel to inappropriately influence, pressure, or interfere with their official duties. A recent internal review that we've done after about 6 months of having this new recusal policy in place demonstrated that approximately 50 instances where we had inspectors who recognized a conflict barred by the policy and who acted appropriately in taking action to recuse themselves. In the coming weeks, we will be issuing a broader version of the policy that applies these same ethical standards across the agency as a whole. In addition, we created the Investigations and Review Unit, which is composed of professionals with law enforcement backgrounds or technical expertise who promptly respond to allegations or evidence of misconduct and unethical behavior by Bureau employees. The IRU also pursues allegations of misconduct against oil and gas companies involved in offshore energy projects, where there is credible evidence that rules and regulations have been violated. The IRU has already been a major contributor to 2 important investigations conducted by the agency, which have been made public. Now, we believe that these far-reaching organizational and procedural changes will significantly enhance the agency's role as a steward of our nation's resources on the outer continental shelf of the U.S. But we are not stopping at structural and procedural reform. We are also infusing the agency with much-needed resources and new personnel. We have already taken the first steps to accelerate our hiring of subject matter experts to bolster existing expertise in certain key areas. Specifically, we are looking for expertise in well operations, production operations, safety and environmental management systems, accident investigations, measurement systems, and deepwater drilling. We are determined not to simply use these additional resources and personnel to do more of what we have done before, because we need to learn from our shortcomings, address our weaknesses, and figure out better and more efficient methods for doing our work, both with respect to resource development as well as to safety oversight and enforcement. Now, to achieve all of this and to sustain our efforts going forward, last fall we created a number of implementation teams, which have been hard at work for many months analyzing critical aspects of our structures, functions, and processes, and implementing needed changes. Through their work, these teams are laying the foundation for lasting change in the way we do business and the way our successor agencies, that is, BOEM and BSEE, will do their business in the future. We will be aided to a great extent by the recommendations that are flowing from the implementation teams I mentioned just a moment ago. But we will seek guidance from other sources as well. One of those sources is the new Ocean Energy Safety Advisory Committee, chaired by one of the United States' leading scientists, Dr. Tom Hunter. This committee includes representatives of federal agencies, industry, and academia. The 15-member committee has already begun its work on a variety of issues related to offshore energy safety, including drilling and workplace safety, well intervention and containment, and oil spill response. This will be a key component of a long-term strategy to address on an ongoing basis the technological needs and inherent risks associated with offshore drilling and deepwater drilling in particular. In addition to reforming our organization and our procedures, we have developed and implemented, as many of you know, a number of new regulations to improve the effectiveness of government oversight of offshore energy development and drilling. First, we published the Drilling Safety Rule last October, which is an important new rule which creates tough new standards for well design, well casing, and cementing, as well as well-controlled procedures and equipment, including blowout preventers. For the first time, operators now required to obtain independent third-party inspection and certification of the proposed drilling process. In addition, an engineer must certify that blowout preventers meet new standards for testing and maintenance and are capable of severing the drill pipe under anticipated well pressures. The second rule we issued in about the same time period is the workplace safety rule, which requires operators to systematically identify risks and establish barriers to those risks, and thereby to reduce the human and organizational errors that lie at the heart of many accidents and many oil spills. This rule introduces for the first time in the U.S. regulatory regime performance-based standards similar to those used by regulators in the North Sea. Operators in the U.S. are now required to develop a comprehensive safety and environmental management program that identifies the potential hazards and risk reduction strategies for all phases of activity, from well design and construction to operation and maintenance on through to the decommissioning of platforms. Finally, we will soon be issuing a second proposed SEMS-related rule, which will require third-party audits of these mandatory SEMS programs and will address additional safety concerns that were not covered by the workplace safety rule. The proposed rule will enhance safety for offshore workers and provide greater protection of the marine environment through additional safety procedures, training programs, notification obligations, and strengthened auditing procedures. And in the very near future, we will be launching another major rulemaking designed to further enhance offshore drilling safety. This process will be broad, inclusive, and ambitious. Our goal will be a further set of enhancements that will increase drilling safety and diminish the risks of another major blowout. It will address weaknesses and necessary improvements to blowout preventer, as well as many, many other issues. In addition to these important new rules, we have, over the course of the last year, issued what we call notices to lessees that provide additional guidance to operators on complying with existing regulations. Last summer, for example, we issued NTL 6, which requires that operators' oil spill response plans include a well-specific blowout and worst-case discharge scenario, and that operators also provide the assumptions and the calculations that lie behind those scenarios. Our engineers and geologists then independently verify these worst-case discharge calculations to ensure that we have an accurate picture of the spill potential of each and every well. Following the lifting of the deepwater drilling moratorium last year, we issued NTL 10, a document that establishes informational requirements, including a mandatory corporate statement from the operator that it will conduct drilling operations in compliance with all applicable agency regulations, including the requirements of the new drilling safety rule. Our regulatory changes over the past year have been sweeping and they have been swift, especially compared to the historical pace of change, which was extremely slow. We've worked through the policy and implementation issues diligently, and we've consulted frequently with members of industry in both the Gulf of Mexico and in Washington to provide guidance on complying with the rules through formal notice to lessees, through questions and answers, and through many, many in-person meetings. Now, a final and very important part of our long-term strategy includes continuing and strengthening our collaboration with our international counterparts. Offshore regulators and senior policy officials have much to gain from collaborating with our counterparts in other countries to elevate the safety and environmental soundness of offshore operations around the world. To this end, in April, the Department of the Interior hosted ministers and senior energy officials from 12 countries and the European Union for the Ministerial Forum on Offshore Drilling Containment. This was a historic meeting for the department, and it has already led to a fruitful dialogue about best practices and how best to develop cutting-edge, effective safety and containment technologies. The meeting concluded with the unanimous recognition that this dialogue should continue at the highest levels of government. In the coming weeks, I will be convening a working group to address the best mechanism for continuing this dialogue. We will also continue to work to strengthen existing channels for international cooperation and the sharing of best practices across different regulatory regimes. For example, we will continue our participation with the International Regulators Forum, the IRF, an organization that we helped found in 1994 to facilitate the cooperation and sharing of information among the leading offshore regulators. BOEMR will also continue to participate in a number of government-to-government initiatives to share best practices and to help build regulatory capacity around the world. BOEMR experts have participated in needs assessments and have conducted workshops in Suriname, Uganda, Papua New Guinea, and Liberia in recent months. BOEMR also continues its long-term technical assistance with the governments of Iraq and India. Later this month, we will host a delegation from Mexico for the first of a series of information exchange workshops to fulfill the Secretary's mandate for developing the highest standards for operating in all parts of the Gulf of Mexico. Going forward, it is my hope that we will continue to collaborate with our foreign counterparts, both through bilateral government-to-government assistance programs and through appropriate multilateral channels in developing safer, more environmentally responsible drilling throughout the world's oceans. Offshore drilling in the U.S. OCS, and indeed around the world, will never be the same as it was a year ago. That much is clear to me and to virtually everyone I've spoken to, no matter what country they come from. The changes that we have put in place will endure because they were urgent, they were necessary, and they were appropriate. And more change will surely come, although certainly not at the frantic pace as in the past year. While a lot has changed over the past year, and we are continuing to upgrade drilling standards and workplace safety, I want to be absolutely clear about one thing, and that is the process of making offshore energy development both safe and sufficient to help meet our nation's and the world's energy demands will never be complete. It is a continuing, ongoing, dynamic enterprise. Therefore, those people who ask whether the regulatory system in the U.S. is fixed yet, or whether the agency is fixed yet, are really asking the wrong question. In fact, the central challenge that Deepwater Horizon and its aftermath have exposed and highlighted is the need to establish the institutions and the systems and the processes of cultural change and improvement necessary to ensure that neither government nor industry ever again becomes self-satisfied to the point that they think no further change is necessary. For in fact, it's exactly that sort of complacency and overconfidence that set the stage for Deepwater Horizon. Let me describe for you some of the key elements that my vision of the future of offshore energy oversight and development includes, most of which flow directly from the issues I've just discussed. First, a well-funded and resourced offshore safety regulator that evaluates the relevant risks associated with offshore drilling and other energy development activities in designing its regulations, its compliance program, and its enforcement programs. This includes the development of more sophisticated methods for measuring risk, designing programs for evaluating those risks, and assessing whether industry is managing those risks appropriately. Second, a regulatory agency that has the tools and the resources, both technological and human, to hold all players involved in drilling and production activity in the nation's oceans to high standards, and if there are safety or environmental violations or an accident, holds all responsible parties accountable. This includes not only those companies that operate leases, the traditional subjects of U.S. agency regulation and enforcement, but their contractors and service providers such as the owners of drilling rigs as well. Third, a system in which all available scientific information and analysis is factored into a process to ensure balanced decision-making with respect to the environmental risks and economic benefits of offshore resource development. Fourth, a regulatory system that strikes appropriate balances and ensures that energy development is conducted safely and in an environmentally responsible manner, while also being more efficient, more responsive, and more transparent. Fifth, a leasing and revenue generation system that encourages the active development of the nation's natural resources made available to industry to provide for the country's energy needs. Sixth, institutions that spur continued government and industry focus on and innovation in the areas of risk assessment, technological advances in safety equipment, emergency response equipment, and further improvements in the effectiveness and availability of subsea containment resources and oil spill response systems and coordination. Seventh, a set of industry performance standards that requires operators to engage in rigorous and deeply self-critical evaluations of the hazards posed by their operations and the measures implemented to address those hazards. Eighth, a set of common principles and standards by which companies drilling and producing in the oceans governing their conduct, regardless of where in the world they are operating. And finally, an ocean energy program that includes not only the development of oil and gas resources, but also the aggressive and responsible development of renewable energy sources. The long-term solution to meeting the nation's and the world's energy needs must include power derived from clean and renewable sources such as offshore wind. Following Deepwater Horizon, a broad consensus quickly emerged in both government and industry that there was an urgent need for upgrading the safety rules and practices within the oil and gas industry. Going forward, we need to do everything possible to keep the complacency from creeping back into anyone's thinking, into the thinking of my agency and into the thinking of industry. Industry and government regulators alike must continue to resist the fierce pressures to return to business as it used to be conducted. Down that path lies another Deepwater Horizon. It's been a long year, and I have no expectation that it will get much easier anytime soon, but I believe in the tangible results in the U.S. that I have seen already, and I have seen the intense interest in what we are doing in industry, in the environmental community, the NGO community, and among the public at large. People are watching our work, not only in the U.S. but around the world, are interested and invested in it, and they all know the stakes involved in whether we succeed. We're determined to succeed in creating a system that allows continued offshore development while ensuring safety and environmental protection. That's the goal we will continue to pursue with absolutely single-minded determination. I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Michael, and for your in-depth exposition of what must have been a huge task. I'm sure there are some questions in the hall. Who would like to go first? Gentleman in front. Can we have a microphone? I'll just nip over. Oh, you've got it. Sorry, we've got it. Here's one for you. Is that one not working? Sorry. There's a better one.
Michael, Fernando from Petrobras. Of course, we've got a great relationship in the Gulf, ex-MMS, and now BOE MRE. My question is, you mentioned a number of technical specs and new guidelines from the BOE, but there is we have to abide by a contract with the MWCC, the Marine Well Containment Company, to drill new wells in the Gulf. Maybe it's lack of attention, but I think you didn't mention that, so you did.
Did mention the MWCC?
Yeah, MWCC, yes.
Yes, as I think everybody here knows, one of the great gaps that was exposed by Deepwater Horizon was the absence of containment capabilities. I think not only we in the U.S., but people around the world saw with this sickening feeling the oil flowing into the Gulf for the many days that it did. Now, what industry does, and I think almost all of you know that, is it quickly mobilized first the majors to develop the Marine Well Containment Company, and that was followed by the development of a second group, primarily composed of smaller and independent companies, the Helix Well Containment Group. And those groups separately, but on parallel tracks, have developed the capabilities to deal with the containment issue and have made quite strong progress since they formed the group in July of last year in developing containment capabilities. So the Marine Well Containment Company and the Helix Well Containment Group are now both available for individual operators to incorporate in their applications to drill. And the process that we're following is to require each and every application for a permit to drill to specify what containment resources are going to be used. And it is not that either the MWCC or the Helix Group is approved in any sense or endorsed in any sense. For example, if a third group grew up and they had adequate containment resources that an operator would designate, that would be fine with us as well. So what a company has to do, what an operator has to do, is to designate the containment resources that's used. We do a very careful analysis of the individual well that an operator is seeking to drill. And then we do an analysis using a software tool that has been developed jointly with industry to determine whether the containment capabilities that have been specified in the application are, in our judgment, adequate to deal with a spill, a subsea spill, were it to occur. So we view the containment capabilities that have been developed, both MWCC and Helix, as a vital part of both enhancing particularly the environmental protection missions of the agency. We know that right now both systems have certain limitations, although the MWCC system just last week announced that it now believed that it had containment capabilities that would extend to 10,000 feet from 8,000 feet. And so I think both systems will continue to expand their capabilities and allow operators, at least in theory, to drill in more and different places. This is such an important issue to us that we are actually having quarterly meetings with both groups so they can keep us up to date on what advances that they are making in developing their containment capabilities. So it is a vital part of what we've been doing.
Second question.
Go ahead.
Okay, with all those new guidelines in place, you think it's gonna take longer to get a permit to drill in the Gulf? It's gonna take much longer.
Well, I think that we gave our first deepwater permit out on February 28th, just 11 days after we reviewed the tests that have been conducted by MWCC. I think that because we have to do more analyses that we've done historically, I think the entire process is likely to take more time for some time. So when people ask, when are we going to return to the pace that we used to enjoy, I think the honest answer to that question is never. But I think that over time, as operators become more familiar with all the things they need to put in their application, and as, frankly, our people get more accustomed to doing the kinds of reviews and analyses they have to do now that they didn't have to do before, I think we will see an acceleration of the speed in processing permits. Again, never back to what it was before, because there's simply more things that we need to do. But I think faster than has been the case since the end of February. So I think that this is not at all surprising that it takes longer now, but I think that there will be an increase in the pace of our ability to process permits over time. I know our people are determined to allow that to happen without for a moment sacrificing the new protections for safety and the environment. I think we can do both things.
Okay, any more questions? Tom, I think you were next. Oh, sorry, well, you then Tom.
Dr. Olabi Ajibade, NMPC Nigeria. It is very laudable to hear all the changes in the inspection, operational, and training that the agency have just implemented. I really congratulate you. However, my question is that if these changes were in place before, can you tell us categorically that the blowout would have been prevented? And my second question is that why do we have to wait till now before we make those changes? Thank you.
Why did we wait until now to make the changes? The answer is that I think that historically, number one, our agency has been badly under-resourced and didn't have both the number of people and the kind of people to do the things that needed to be done in order to build up our defenses against a major accident like this. I think I've seen this in a number of other fields, not just in offshore drilling. It sometimes takes a catastrophe like this in order to mobilize the attention of both government regulatory agencies and industry. I think if you certainly canvassed industry, Deepwater Horizon has been a wake-up call to them as well. I've seen a tremendous amount of activity within the industry to take a look at many of the issues that we as regulators are looking at. So it is unfortunately sad but true that I think this sense of complacency or overconfidence that I referred to before had infected industry, and corporate executives have repeatedly told me that they accept that and agree with that, but it certainly had infected our agency as well. So we have been, over the past year, we as a regulatory agency have been subjected to more external and internal reviews than any agency in the U.S. government over the last 10 years. And I think that has been difficult because it's interfered with our activities, but I think it's also been helpful because we've had a lot of different sets of eyes look at the way we've done business and make suggestions to us in terms of what we can do to improve. And we're really incorporating all the findings of those reviews and the recommendations of those reviews into our efforts to make changes across the board in the way that the agency has done business. So we're trying to turn what could be viewed as a negative into a positive that helps us march forward and really achieve very substantial advances in the way we do business.
Right. Tom?
Is this that?
Not on.
Tom Bergen from Reuters. I have a question just about your investigation into the oil spill, or the Deepwater Horizon, the joint one with the US Coast Guard. I was wondering if you could tell me how that's progressing, and also how, if you have any reaction to today's investigation released by Transocean. Thank you.
The investigation is in its concluding phases, the joint investigation between us and the Coast Guard. Because of the amount of work that needed to be done and certain logistical delays in getting the blowout preventer from subsea and getting it to a place where it could be tested, and the fact that the testing took longer than we expected, we have an extension on the due date of the report, as you probably know, to July 27th. I have every reason to believe that we will meet that deadline and that the report will be issued at that time. In terms of your second question, I have been told that the Transocean internal investigative report was released today. I literally have not seen it, much less studied it in the way that I would have to give an informed response to your question.
Any more questions? I think there's one at the back there.
Phil Murray, Petrotechnics. Could you comment on your approach in terms of a balance between prescriptive regulation and a more goal-setting environment?
The U.S. regulatory regime, as I think you know, has been an almost exclusively prescriptive environment up until the present time. Now, we're well aware that other nations, including in the North Sea, including the UK and Norway, have a very different style of regulating and a very different method, focusing on performance standards rather than as much prescriptive regulations. The way we can and will proceed, I think, needs to be understood in the context of the U.S. regulatory system more broadly, which is almost exclusively a prescriptive regime. So even if, as a philosophical matter, we thought that we should go to performance-based standards exclusively, I think that would probably be a difficult effort to conclude successfully in the United States. So that's a kind of a big picture constraint. We have already with the SEMS rule, and we will continue with the new SEMS rule that I mentioned in the speech, continue to work on performance-based standards that we think are important and helpful and that are a substantial supplement to and augmentation of our prescriptive standards. I think we will probably see more of them as we move forward over time, so that I think if you look, for example, 5 to 7 years down the road, I think we will have more of a hybrid regime than we currently do. But I don't think that we will ever eliminate or even substantially eliminate the prescriptive standards that have been the cornerstones of our regulatory system up until now. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a bit of an international convergence, and that even some of the performance-based regimes may add some prescriptive elements into their systems. I'm not saying that we'll all meet exactly in the middle, but what I see are two models that are quite different now, moving more towards the center so that they will have, over time, more similarities than they do today.
Okay, we've got another one at the back there, and I think that might have to be the last one if we're going to get it onto our next.
Paul Ziff, Ziff Energy in Calgary and Houston. You outlined a very comprehensive and rigorous approach for the future. There was a bit of a commentary about delays. Can you talk about the challenges of technical staffing to achieve all those new roles?
There are real challenges in getting adequate technical staff. I personally made efforts both last fall and this spring to try to step up our recruitment activities. I visited petroleum engineering schools in Texas and Louisiana, and then this spring, because we need to hire environmental scientists to do the environmental assessments and reviews that we're doing, went to visit close to a dozen schools, both primarily on the west coast of the U.S., but also elsewhere. There was a tremendous outpouring of interest. We got, with respect to the engineering tour 500 applications for jobs. With respect to the environmental science tour, 1,200 applications for jobs. Historically, the big problem that we've had is we are dealing from a position of disadvantage with respect to salaries. Our salaries simply don't match those of industry, which is more of a problem on the engineering side than it is, frankly, on the environmental science side. So we are working in a number of ways to try to overcome that hurdle, including trying, so far not successfully, trying to get permission to pay more to our governmental engineers than other employees in the agency and in the federal government generally. We think there is a clear and demonstrated imbalance that people can make much more in the private sector than they can working for the government. There will always be some differential. I mean, one of the costs of doing public service is you get paid less. But it should not be so substantially less that it discourages people once they see the black and white of what the salaries are that they're going to be making both immediately and in the future. It ought not to be so dramatic that it discourages them from working for the government. And I'm afraid we're still there. We will continue to work with other agencies in the government to try to get enhanced pay authority so that we can do what other countries do, what the UK does, what Norway does, what other regulators do, which is to try to recognize that there is this gap that needs to be closed to some extent. So that's an ongoing saga. I can't tell you right now that we've solved that problem, but we've certainly recognized the problem and are working as hard as we can to try to address it.
Right, well, thank you very much, Michael.
You're welcome. My pleasure.